For as long as horror has been a thing, it has been known as a medium built around pushing boundaries of audience imagination, whether through taking something as simple as a doll or a clown and twisting it into something plucked straight out of a nightmare, or leaping forward with something so supernaturally chilling that it keeps audiences hooked for hours. The world of horror just has a unique way of keeping its fans coming back for more. However, that isn't always the case. In fact, there are some horror films that, whilst maybe even classics, you never want to return to. They might push you to too many uncomfortable places, or they might be built around one killer reveal, but in every case, it's often the reality that one time through is more than enough. I'm Josh from What Culture Horror, and this is 8 horror movies you only ever watch once. Number 8, The Girl Next Door. Based on the 1989 Jack Ketchum novel and taking inspiration from a chilling real-life murder, The Girl Next Door might not be the first horror film to take inspiration from a real-life series of events, but it's certainly one of the more memorably gruesome. It takes a special sort of film to be classed as polarizing in a world as bloody and gruesome as horror, but The Girl Next Door sure does a great job in qualifying for that description. The entire movie is pretty much a non-stop torture session, with the evil Chandler family inflicting some of the most brutal acts actually imaginable on an innocent young woman named Meg. Everything from beatings to sexual assault, mutilations, starvation, and burnings is on the cards with these absolute monsters, and this only goes on to create something that viewers really don't need to revisit once it's all over. Number 7. Suspiria 2018. I don't know whether or not this is going to get me sent to horror jail, but I bloody love the Suspiria remake, you know. Sure, it's up its own and the original can never be beaten in my opinion, but it is an effective reimagining that takes the source material in a completely different direction. From the strange new score to Tilda Swinton's mad performances to the hugely disturbing body horror, it's undeniably its own original beast with plenty to like, but good lord does it overstay its welcome. At 2.5 hours long, it is a demanding viewing experience, with as many odd slow sequences as there are moments of horrific gore. It gets points for being a singular uncompromised vision, but once you know the twists, it's a hard sell to spend such a long time going through it again for the highlights. Number 6. The Rage Carrie 2. The only reason why anyone would ever want to watch this film is to see why it thinks it can have the audacity to call itself a sequel to the 1976 classic. Given how successful both Stephen King's book and the original adaptation had been, it's maybe surprising to hear that The Rage Carrie 2 was actually released 23 years after the first film in 1999. However, the release of Wes Craven's Scream in 96 had completely changed horror's landscape, and franchises up and down the land were pulling together more modern, meta-heavy films that could cash in on the success and hoover up the teenager demographics again. Carrie's high school setting and themes of identity and growing up would, in theory, make for a good fit here, right? But sadly not in execution. The film was panned by critics at the time and became the box office bomb of the year, making less than $18 million back against a budget of $21 million. Number 5. The Woman. The Woman is a deeply unsettling flick that follows the story of a feral cannibalistic woman. The woman is picked up by a lawyer named Chris, who brings her home to his family in order to try and, domesticate her, but that only proves to be the trigger for all the gruesome carnage to be unleashed. And that's partly because it turns out that Chris and his son are really no better than the cannibal they've brought home, keeping a small girl with her eyes gouged out in the barn and sexually assaulting the woman when their attempts to domesticate her fail. On top of some of these horribly gruesome features, there's also the horrific scene of someone having their heart ripped out of their chest and eaten in front of the camera, which people probably only need the one sight of during their lifetime. It's one of those where it's all about the torture, and while there is a point behind it, it's not necessarily an enjoyable thing to watch. Number 4. Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. In comparison to the other great slasher franchises of the 80s, Friday the 13th probably stuck to its simple formula of hacking and slashing up horny teenagers better than most, even when Jason went to hell and space. However, by the time it came to the 5th installment in the series, it was clear that things were growing a little stale with the Voorhees and Camp Crystal Lake. Instead of just leaving things there though, Paramount Pictures came up with the revolutionary idea of doing the exact same things again, only this time with a brand new whodunit mystery bundled in, just like the first movie. Intended to be the first of a trio of films following a different killer each time around, A New Beginning is once again ridiculously low budget and even manages to stand out with a way more sleazier feel than any other installment in the series. And also calling this film a whodunit is probably a stretch, as there's almost no time or effort being spent during the film's runtime on establishing suspects, motives, or any sense of suspicion. Don't go in expecting any Scream levels of mystery here. In fact, the only reason why someone might take the time to rewatch any of A New Beginning is to try and go back and work who exactly the killer is meant to be again, as it's that outlandish. Number 3. Audition. Easily one of the most infamous and unsettling horror films to have come out of Japan, Audition is a pleasant enough rom-com turned horrific torture flick that would go on to influence the likes of Hostel further down the line. The story of a lovesick middle-aged man who gets women to audition to be his partner, the film establishes itself as horror's most misleading title by spending the first half of its runtime posing as an innocent tale of two would-be lovers courting each other. That completely flips in an instant though, when this seemingly innocent girl, Asami, reveals herself to be one of the most sadistic serial killers going. It's certainly a clever twist, and one that most horror fans are sure to enjoy, but once Audition goes into full swing, there's really no breaks for how brutal it gets. It's the very definition of a slow build, and while the payoff is absolutely worth it, it's not a movie that demands repeat viewings. Number 2. Hostel. On the subject of overly gory films, Eli Roth's Hostel came out in 2005, hot on the heels of the torture Prayers. The first title in what would eventually become an original trilogy of films, Hostel revolves around a mysterious organization that captures, imprisons, and tortures tourists who are lured to a Slovakian hostel. It is revealed that this organization is made up of rich folk who torture and kill people to relieve some of the stresses of their everyday life. And while that might be overdone as a concept now, Hostel really pulls no punches when it comes to its gore, with decapitations, throat slits, and a blowtorch to the face all shown on screen with an excruciating amount of detail. This genre of film is hardly known for its deep-layered storytelling, but there isn't really a whole lot to digest or enjoy with Hostel once it's been endured once. It doesn't have the wacky time jumps or outlandish trap gimmicks of something like Saw, and the film notoriously has an exceptionally cheap, grimy look to it. For fans of that subgenre, it's absolutely worth a watch, but almost definitely not worth returning back to afterwards. Number 1. The Human Centipede. Undoubtedly one of the most outlandish films ever released, The Human Centipede came out in 2009, courtesy of Dutch filmmaker Tom Six. No one ever asked for nor wanted it, but out it came, and its gruesome premise instantly drew in viewers by the thousand. Taking inspiration from some supposed experiments during the Second World War, The Human Centipede is centered around a crazed surgeon with a seriously unhealthy lab obsession. He kidnaps 3 tourists and stitches them together in a line so they share one singular digestive system. The entire film just goes out of its way to try and establish itself as the most disgusting thing ever put on the big screen, and while it comes close, it very much is a gimmick movie. There's little there of note outside the shock of its premise, which by now is nowhere near as novel as it was a decade ago. If a movie built around shock factor no longer shocks, then what's it got to offer? So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Which horror movies will you never watch again and why? And while you're down there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to whatculture.com for more lists and news like this every single day.